Welcome, everyone. I'm Carl Lejouet, your provost, and this is one of those moments where it's really great to be a provost and get to be part of some of the great scholarship at our university. And I want to welcome everyone to this. It's our second event in the Provost Distinguished Speaker Series for this academic year. This speaker series is an annual event where we invite our recently appointed Board of Trustees, distinguished professors, and endowed chairs to share their scholarship with us. Like many things in the past several months, we've had to adjust the normal format of this series from in-person to virtual. We're really pleased to share this opportunity to bring our community together in appreciation and, most importantly, celebration of the excellent scholarship we do here at UConn. I would be remiss not to acknowledge the work it has taken to arrange this series, which has been managed primarily by Amanda Pitts in our office in partnership with our new Vice Provost, Michael Bradford. I want to thank Board of Trustees Professor Sandy Chafouleas, first for chairing the search committee that brought me here, but beyond that, for today, for sharing her scholarship with us today. We've asked Neag Dean Gladys Crescent to introduce Professor Chafouleas. Before I do that, I'd like to say a few words about Dean Crescent. Prior to UConn, she was an Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Research for the College of Education at the University of South Florida. She is a highly accomplished professor of mathematics education. She has been a director of the center and was an endowed chair in education innovation at USF. She's a highly respected scholar in mathematics education with a focus on at-risk children. She's published several, I believe 4 books and numerous journal articles with an extensive grant track record across NSF, DOE, and state funding at over $30 million as PI and co-PI. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. And Gladys, I turn it over to you to introduce Dr. Chafouleas and her talk, Well-Being in School, Child, and Community, Advancing the Whole, Not the Sum of Its Parts.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker, UConn Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor Sandy Chafouleas. With 2 decades of service at the university, Sandy is a Neag School endowed professor, as well as the founder and director of the UConn Collaboratory on School and Child Health. In addition, she has previously served as Associate Dean of UConn's Graduate School and as an Associate Dean for Research at the Neag School. Sandy is a licensed psychologist and an expert in school mental health, behavior assessment, and the CDC's Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child model, a holistic approach to education focused on supporting student well-being in schools nationwide. She has also led many collaborative community outreach efforts, from symposiums and documentary film screenings on task forces and panel discussions, focused on school-based mental health reform, student social and emotional well-being, and school and community response to childhood trauma. An exceptionally prolific research scholar, Sandy has served as PI or co-PI on research grants exceeding a total of $12 million, has authored more than 150 publications, and regularly presents nationwide in addition to making media appearances as a highly sought-after expert on numerous external news outlets. She also writes a blog for Psychology Today on student well-being and has advised more than 24 UConn doctoral students and postdoctoral fellows. Prior to her time in academia, Sandy worked as a school psychologist and school administrator in a variety of settings, supporting the needs of children with behavior disorder. Please welcome Dr. Chafouleas.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the very nice invitation. Just give me 1 second to get the PowerPoint up and share. Can you see my screen? That's the biggest question. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. I'm actually, if it's okay, and is it too small? Can somebody just answer that question? You know, I'm just.
Can you make it a
seeing
little
here
bit bigger?
Yes, I can. Because what I want to do, is that okay? Or that doesn't make it bigger? Okay, what I want to do is just go ahead. Yes, okay. I'm going to just keep it not in PowerPoint, not in slide view so that I can see all of you as I'm talking today, because I think that's a little bit nicer than, well, nicest would be together, would be to be physically together. Second nice will be at least to be able to watch some of your faces as we go. So again, thank you for the lovely introduction. It's not necessary. Most importantly, thank you to the Provost for this wonderful invitation, and to the Neag family for creating these endowed positions that are affording me the opportunity to be here with you and to advance this work. Dean Christine mentioned something about 2 decades of being here, and I really don't like mentioning that, but I will say that I think it's kind of interesting to me that the year that I arrived was about the year after, or about one to 2 years after the Neag gift was given to create the Neag School of Education. So I'm particularly honored that I have seen my career start with what a wonderful gift it was, and now to be a recipient of being able to be one of the endowed people as part of that gift. So as noted, I'm a school psychologist by training. It means that I do all kinds of things to support kids from birth to 21 across all kinds of areas. And school psychologists pretty much do that work by problem solving with primary caregivers. So we work indirectly by supporting the caregivers that are doing the direct care. And a main caregiving setting is schools. And so that's the focus, or what I want to try and talk about today. But to start, I want to start with the definition of well-being, thanks to Google and dictionary.com, right? We can see that what is well-being? It's being comfortable, being happy or healthy. But I'm not really even sure what that means, because it seems to me that would be very different for each of us. What does being comfortable, happy, or healthy to some degree mean for each of us? The World Health Organization helps us out a little bit more by telling us that well-being is a state of being, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. It's not merely the absence of disease, right? So it's not only the absence of negative and the presence of positive, but it also means it's across lots of different areas, physical, mental, and social. The question really is, how do we get there? Or more importantly, for what I want to talk about today, is how do we help kids get there? Because their well-being is heavily dependent on the systems of care that are around them, including schools. So I want to start by asking you to think about your own prior experiences. Just think for a minute and identify some of those experiences that have influenced your outcomes, why you're here today, both good and bad experiences. And consider how school was situated or is situated for those students. A big shout out I meant to give to the students I see listed here today, how school is situated within those influences. So for example, perhaps there was a day that you didn't academically perform like you wanted to, right? Because you were like really physically sick, you didn't feel well. Or maybe you had some social conflicts that were throwing off your focus. Or maybe on the other side, you had a teacher that you truly felt connected with. You loved being in this classroom, you loved going to that class, and you could feel comfortable sharing all of your thoughts and feelings, and you were strived always to do your best with this in this situation. What I want you to do is to think about the link, and that's what it says right on the slide, in connecting, in linking, in integrating learning and health when we talk about well-being. Because thinking about the link means that we understand those two things are related. Learning and health influence each other in ways that extend across our entire life course. Because we have health behaviors, like physical and emotional health, are really a prerequisite to being able to learn. And we also know that research tells us that education, or more learning, is related to longer and higher quality life, right? So they're connected, they're integrated. But what happens in schools when we don't connect to those things? We have a broad picture of a classroom here. that basically is telling us that when we don't connect all of those things together, we set children and their teacher here in the middle up for failure, for not being successful. So the question that we're working toward in the collaboratory and the work that I'm centering my work on is, how do we connect all of the parts that are related to helping students be successful? And I would like to say I created it, but I didn't. I found this model a few years ago that the CDC had created in joint partnership with the ASCD, which is an education organization. In 2014, they got together and said that they needed to do better with each of their efforts, basically, in what it means to do the work that they do to integrate learning and health. And the picture looks cool. Sure, but let's break it apart a little bit to understand really what we mean by this WISC model, or whole school, whole community, whole child model. You can see in the green in the middle, the child's at the center, and what we want to do is surround the child so that they feel safe, healthy, engaged, supported, and challenged. And we do that by using the evidence in each of these blue circle spaces. So there are 10 of them, 10 components. Everything from nutrition over here, to the physical up here, to the emotional, social, emotional down here, to families, to teachers, making sure our teachers are well. So we do that by making sure that we use evidence-based practices in coordinating our policy, our practice, and our process. So this white little circle, we coordinate all of the things in the blue to make sure that the green is ready. I love this model, and I'll explain a little bit more why later. We've used it, and we're using it as our catalyst for how we do the integrated work that we're trying to do. Because basically everything in that wheel, all of those blue things, are gears. Everything in the wheel fits together. The gears fit together as moving influences, right? I don't think we could stop, and we'll have a conversation later. Maybe Jen can come up with a question that says, well, is there anything else that we're missing? Or I really don't think that we need to have this, right? But I'm convinced that they are. And I think we could just go like this, right? It all sounds great, right? We're all set. We totally buy into this. We understand that everything's connected, but that would be really naive to think that if I just gave you the last few slides, everything in the world would be great, everyone would get it, and we could move on to something else in the world. And in fact, what I would do is start with some of my own failures in thinking, or my own challenges that I found over time, right? So the things that got me here today to speak with you are all of that work, all of the grants, all of the publications, all of the things that I've done in the gear of behavior support. I'm a school psychologist. I work in social, emotional, and behavioral primarily realms. And so those are all of the things that I did both as a practitioner and as a researcher. I could design you an intervention support plan so that your student would be less disruptive, more engaged. In my research role, I've published all of these studies that demonstrate positive effects of these kinds of interventions. But the lens has always been this big gear of behavior support. I didn't change it up enough in all of those decades of work. I didn't ask questions like, well, does the child get adequate nutrition? I didn't consider ways to build other things into my intervention plans, like maybe getting outside or movement activities would be just as successful as these reinforcement-based systems, for example, that I was building. And so the question really is why? Why? Well, for one, it's partly historical because, you know, the primary responsibility or core mission of schools has been the focus on academics. Certainly, in the past 6 months, we have seen the critical need for that shift and the almost panicked pandemic fervent response that I certainly hope will sustain over time so that we can actually adequately fund it. But that's a whole talk for another day, so we can go on and on about that. We see the shift that schools are more than places for academic success. They have roles and responsibilities in other places. But the other reason, and the focus for this talk today, is that it's really complex. It can feel overwhelming to be able to put all of those parts together in supporting what it means to have whole school and whole child success. And so where do we get our solution from? Where do we get the frameworks and the organizational spaces and the ways to help schools be successful in putting those parts together. And I think we can get that from using a prevention science or a public health framework. Those of you that are familiar understand it, but those of you that maybe haven't seen this type of triangle before, we could use, just to use something that's a little controversial right now, let's use vaccines as the example of what we're doing. We're hoping in the very, very near future that we'll have a successful vaccine so that we can all start becoming close together in person again. So that's what we're doing at this universal level. It's something that could be provided to everyone in a system so that we can prevent that risk and promote our success. But we know that simply just putting that vaccine out there is not going to get us 100% compliance and interest and all that jazz. So we know we've got teams of researchers right now that are studying the things that we need to do to provide targeted and select, so more intense supports and strategies to engage use of this universal strategy. That's a public health framework in a nutshell. And what it has been what it means, sorry, let me go back to this. What it means is that what we're trying to do in two ways is to integrate across risk levels. So on the right side, we have a goal is to maximize intervention impact for subgroups. You could use a picture of Kathy as an example of what we mean by stretching that Kathy across the different layers to get different kinds of dosage, different thicknesses, different tastes of what that same candy means by intensifying the same strategy across risk levels. We also can do our work within risk levels. And here we're choosing one risk level and we're trying to maximize intervention impact. I'm not sure about the candy analogy for this particular example, but if I go to my own world of behavior, we could say we could do something like a point system for reinforcing behavior combined with another intervention that gives you a connection with a trusted adult to check in and check out. So that's an example of how we combine within risk levels. This model or this framework has been applied to education. Here's some pictures pulled from Google from school districts around the country. I couldn't even tell you where they were right now, but here's an example. The part that I want to emphasize in here, though, is that we haven't really integrated. We're doing a good job understanding what it means within that up and down or the vertical level. But if you see in each one of these pictures, we put behavior on one side, we put academics on one side. I don't see physical, I don't see social emotional. We see this idea of schools being very familiar at organizing the ways and the kinds of services they deliver, but they're still considered within an individual silo or an individual gear or a space. And what we really need to do is have it going in both ways. We need that integration and that whole piece because that's what's going to give us capacity to be more efficient in what we're delivering across our menu of options. It's going to reduce system overload and potentially increase sustainability if we can put all of it together at once instead of running around and trying to do each little gear separately with its own little system. In sum, if we can figure out how to help do integration, we can have synergistic effects. An example of a picture, and I'll let you just stew on this, we're not going to talk about it so much, of what we use when we go out to talk about what this means is this little picture. And you could take a blank little triangle yourself and fill it in for your own lives. The points that I want to emphasize in here is that what we do is we put this braid in the middle. We put this braid or this weaving together of all of the kinds of things that we want to worry about in well-being, right? All the things that we care about. We weave them together and we use the school as providing services and supports, but we also embed that school within understanding of what's available in our communities to help do that, because we can't expect that schools can do everything by themselves, right? So we have lots of examples, and usually we have these very heated debates or these fun discussions because people will be like, well, you didn't put this in there and you didn't put that, and what about this? And I say, well, you can design this however you really want. My graphic designer said I couldn't put a single other word on this when we were working to build this, right? Because there are lots of different options and ways to think about what you have in supporting in the school and in the community and braiding together those your services. So the question or the summary of what we get back to is this idea of integration in education sounds great. I'm convinced in everything, but how do we take the circle and we put it into the triangle in the work that we're doing? How do we help build the tools and the supports that schools need to do this white part, to coordinate their policies, their processes, and their practices? And I'm going to just share with you a few different examples of things that we're doing to kind of move that along. This brings us back to the idea of the Think About the Link, which is what we call our Think About the Link, or our school-based toolkit of things that we've been building or working on and collaborating across all different people, because I will admit that I don't have expertise in physical health, so I need to partner, and I'm very grateful in the collaboratory that we've got people, wonderful researchers here at UConn who have expertise in those areas that can help partner with us in building the materials that will be helpful to do this integrated work. So our toolkit looks at policy, process, and practice, or not, it's not a toolkit, it's a bunch of different toolkit spaces. And so, for example, in the policy realm, very, very fortunate that the Rudd Center was able to come here a few years ago, thanks to wonderful efforts by INCHIP and in getting them to move from our friend down the road to up with us. They have a very long history, and Marlene Schwartz in particular, of building this tool that helps schools do evaluations of their policies in school wellness, which is one part of what we mean by integrated well-being. So Marlene and I have been able to partner together in being able to build this thing called WellStat WISC. And so we're still working on it, but basically it blows up the WellStat to be able to look at all of these different components, all 10 of these areas that we think are the gears that are important to child success. And you know, it's pretty simple in terms of looking at, here's an example down here of what it looks like if I stop touching my buttons, to help schools understand if they have no policy, strong policy, or weak policy in these particular areas. Policy isn't my area. I'm more of a practice-based person, so it's been wonderful to partner with Marlene as we understand the value of both of them integrating together. So policies help us codify the practices that we do in schools, so that when the waves come and go and people change and move, we have those policies in place to help tell us. The middle part of our toolkit is the practice part, right? So then we've got policy, but now we need help to understand what are the knowledge and the skills and the attitudes that we need to help us do all of these practices, and how do we make them really usable? So our focus has been really on the idea of usability, meaning simple ways to be able to ensure that the intended user can do it in a way that is helpful, so can take that evidence in physical health from our researchers like Lindsay DeStefano and Jenny McGarry that are out there doing this great work. How do we take the information that they're doing and translate it into ways that create these sound bites, simple sound bites in varied formats? So these are just examples here of podcast series, because we got asked for a podcast series, particularly as people were driving all around, which isn't happening quite so much, but that's out there if you wanted to watch that. Really short videos with practitioners. So we went out and asked people, what does this practice, this evidence-based practice look like in your school, and tell us what it means. Or the things that pivoted quickly this summer were strategies and supports and simple strategies that people can use to be ready as schools reopened as part of COVID. And this particular report, so we have reports and briefs, I don't know, seems to have gotten quite a bit of interest nationally, so I'm glad we put the effort into doing that this summer. Our last piece is that process, because, okay, you've got policies on one end, you've got practices on the other end, but really it's about how are you aligning those things, right? How are you checking to make sure that they're aligned, and then how are you embedding a space to make sure that you have understanding what implementation efforts, how are we using the science of implementation, lots of great stuff from the business school in this area, to engage effective strategies that can facilitate your decisions from early planning before you even say, hey, I want this shiny new program to come into place, to how do you sustain those practices across different tiers of intensity. So again, this is an example on the left of a project that we worked on last year through support from the Connecticut Department of Education with some districts where we worked with them to code their policies, and then we did some interviews to see, well, what does that look like in practice? And we came up with recommendations. The little things you see here are, if you get a star, that means your policy and your practice is aligned. If you get something else, it means maybe you want to tweak something in your policy, or maybe you want to tweak something in your practice. And offered very specific recommendations for them about how you do all of that work. Okay, that's kind of the tools and the things that we're doing. The undergird behind all of that is science, right, and research, and yes, extramural funding and great grants that can drive what we know within each of those domains. But we also need work now to drive what's happening to be able to work on that integration. So before I give you summary recommendations, I like this quote a lot and I use it a lot. We were very fortunate in the end of summer toward early fall to be able to do a study on Connecticut school district and school administrators who were willing to participate with us via survey or interview about what was going on when we take all of those 10 years and we put them together. What is your biggest worry now? What are your top priorities before COVID, now during COVID, and how have those things shifted? And I think this quote this is the one that keeps me up at night, actually, because I think it's brilliant and it's beautiful and it's apropos for what's needed now, is to think about, I have a picture in my head and it's like an earthquake, the school administrator, and we're trying to figure out how to go from A to B, and in the middle of it, there are all kinds of fissures that I have to figure out how to jump over on a daily basis, and how to help my children and my teachers be whole and successful. So if you want to read that brief, that's all I'm going to give you on that. You can go to the website and download that on your own and read what other folks said from there. But that's really the point of all of this work, is the fissures, right? To have the tools to be able to do. I just think this quote nicely summarizes the rationale to be able to build tools that can facilitate integration of the work. So moving forward, I hope I've tried to convince you that we need to work on advancing the whole, not the sum of its parts, if we really want to have whole school and child health and community health and success. And so the lessons that I've learned, I'll give you 4, or things that I think that we need to work toward, and then we can have a great conversation. First, we need to understand that when we're doing this, we need to embrace that integrated work is a lot harder than siloed work, right? It's a lot harder for me to get out of behavior supports and work in other areas. It takes time to collaborate. It can be really frustrating to get out of the gate because somehow we all might be doing the same thing, but we speak a completely different language, right? So we need that. But the rewards are so much larger when we do that over the long run in terms of what we produce, and also the meaningfulness of it in solving real problems. So embrace the challenge, relish the challenge, I guess, would be number 1. Number 2 is that we do need to advocate for funding streams that advance integrated work, particularly in child issues. Education and health are completely separate entities, and we need science and we need the research has to be the foundation for moving this work forward. Third is that we need to explicitly articulate and activate an understanding that equity undergirds the reason for all of this work. Equity undergirds the reasons for doing all of this. And last but not least is really to engage partnership, certainly with researchers that are outside of their disciplinary comfort zone, but most importantly with the intended users from the very initial design stages, because the usability is really the key to sustained positive change in whole school child and community. And I would say that after 2 decades of doing this and all of those publications, I'd probably throw most of them away, and the ones that I'm most proud of or I think are most beneficial are the ones where I've tried to partner with new people and advance thinking or combine thinking or integrate thinking in new ways. And so for that, I'm very grateful for everyone here that has partnered with me and is interested in partnering as we move forward on that. And that's the ending slide, is the accolades and thank you and deep appreciation, first of all, to the many, many, many collaborating school and community partners, people that are willing to hear us out and be part of the journey. Certainly to the collaboratory, the steering committee members. Carol Polifroni was the person who put this silly little proposal together with me a few years ago to try and think about, well, how do we take what we're doing in nursing and how do we take what we're doing in education to really pull that together and advance the efforts that the UConn community is doing in school and child research. Thank you to INCHIP, most particularly Deb Corman at the time, for us presenting this idea to them, and she thought it was a great idea and she thought it was really important, and to Amy now for continuing that interest, along with the Neag School of Education. At the time, it was a partnership between the two to say that, yeah, we can support this, we think it's important. I've already talked about the Rudd Center, very glad they're here and willing to collaborate in their expertise in nutrition and bring that to a larger scale, along with the State Department of Education, who's listened to our ideas and been very supportive. Most recently, the Neag Foundation has gifted us some funds to be able to do some of this integrated work. So it's not the stuff that I can get federal funding for because it's siloed in one particular area, but letting us do the work to help schools grapple with some of the issues they're dealing with COVID, to transition some of these toolkit resources that you're seeing. And then last but not least, to the Provost Office and the OVPR, who did provide seed funding for us to get started with many of these different ideas. So for that, we're very grateful. And with deep appreciation, we'll open it to conversations with Jen. I've lost her on my screen, so I'm going to close my stop sharing so we can
I think
look at
probably
each other,
once I start talking, you'll probably see me pop back up. So first and foremost, I think we should have a minute for golf clap, congratulations, thanks that we would normally do were we in person. Oh, Christy Henderson figured out how to do an emoji clap. There are the emoji claps as well if you click on that smiley face at the bottom of your screen. But I think certainly, Sandy, from all of us, we're immensely grateful for you starting this conversation for us today and sharing your research with us and giving us so many wonderful ideas to think about. So my plan will be to moderate the question and answer part of this as was previously discussed. And I can invite everyone to either raise your hand. If you use the hand raise function, then I will call on you to ask your question. You can also feel free to type a question in the chat. I'll be watching the chat, and either if it's something you want to send me and have me ask, I'm happy to do that, or just pop the question in the chat and then I'll help moderate those pieces too. So either way would be fine. And while people are thinking of their question or thinking about raising their hands, I'll start off with one of my own. I think Sandy accurately guessed that my first question was going to be around gears. So you did very well in that regard. One of the things that I thought was very interesting about the visual around the gears in particular is that they did look to be different sizes. And I wondered if some of that was intentional, if it's more graphic, or, are there ways in which environmental factors shape the gear, these components, are they sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, how that might play, that concept might play into responses to those stimuli?
Sure. So that's a great question. Anything that you saw that was maybe missized is probably my technical error necessarily. So my intent would be, although in our pictures things are different sizes just graphically, but I think that the bigger issue or the more important question you're asking is should the gears be different sizes? They absolutely should be, because every context, every community, every school district, every family system is different, right? So what we need, or what I need today in terms of all of those different gears, is very different probably than, Jen, what you need today. So that is the beauty, and actually how I think the WISC model allows for contextual variation, for equitable response, even within that space. So, yeah, they should definitely be different. I paused there because the concern, or what we found when we were first starting going into schools with this model, is that everybody gets excited about it, and they get excited and they start identifying things that they're doing, and then they start freaking out, right, about the things they're not doing, right? And so we had to really step back and build in those process materials that we're talking about, ways to think about how do you take your strategic planning and how do you identify where your priorities are right now and what you're going to work on. We don't do all 10. I mean, we do things in all 10, but we don't emphasize needs in all areas at all times. We need to be strategic about that given our resources. So yes, different sizes
thank you.
are intentional, but not intentional by me, but intentional by district.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I think certainly answered one of my questions, you know, and that I think what we've lived through in this past year, and especially with our school systems, you know, as units and the people working in those school systems have lived through is a perfect indication of there are moments you have to completely pivot, you know, and do things that you've never done before. So I wonder if you can share with us, you know, some feedback, some ideas more about the sort of the COVID response, you know, to, you know, the communities and districts you've been working with who are already putting these things in place. How has what have you seen? What are the themes that are coming out of their sort of response to COVID? And also I'm curious if this framework already being in place was somehow grounding in a way for them in terms of their COVID response that maybe they've been able to articulate.
Sure. So I would say that for districts that were had strong tiered systems frameworks and had strong ways of thinking about wellness as a whole or well-being as a whole, maybe the pivot was a bit easier, or maybe, I mean, nothing has been easy. I need to start with that and give a big clap. I'd like the green claps from everybody again to our school district leaders and school administrators and state education leaders, because nothing has been easy, but systems that were able to capitalize on the things they were already doing to make the tweaks and the pivots are better prepared to be able to handle the change and the shifts that have happened. So you asked what are the biggest priorities. The first thing would be a redefinition of school safety, right? If we had this panel a year ago, we'd be talking about gun violence and we'd be talking about metal detectors and whether they're a good thing or a bad thing in schools, right? Stop for a second though and define school safety today. It's about physical health behaviors and getting compliance with that space. It's about social emotional wellness, which was part of our prior definition, but it wasn't the primary front and center. Social emotional strategies that we need for our teachers, in particular, to be able to support all of the pivots they're being asked to do, and our students and our families as they grapple with how to handle this. So we've redefined, at least in my opinion, how we would define the characteristics of school safety. I think that was pretty much all your answers. I think I had something else, but I can't remember what it was.
That's great. And I wonder, no, that's great. I wonder if a quick corollary to that is, you know, certainly one definition, you know, expanding that is also expanding what school is, given how many of our students aren't in buildings. You know, I know in my home, school is happening here in my home, right? So any thoughts or feedback on, you know, how the model works to extend beyond even what we think of as school?
Sure. So that's a great way of thinking about what we mean by tiered services, right? Because our idea of what we mean by tiered services has completely flipped and changed. And at again, I keep saying the word undergird, but at the foundation of all of that within the green part, what everybody needs are simple, usable strategies to support emotional health right now, right? And that means that school role is not necessarily, yes, I would love to hire more school counselors. I'm going to get in trouble if I don't say that. And school psychologists. And yes, we definitely need more mental health service providers out there. But what we also need is to equip the people who are with those children day in and day out, right, with strategies to support your personal well-being as well as the child's emotional health. So I think I had said one of the reports that we had written this summer was this idea of taking a paper that somebody else had written years ago about evidence-based strategies for supporting behavioral health. And so what we did is we picked through each of them and we defined which ones were most important for in the COVID area that could change those behaviors. And then we shared what those would look like if I were a family or an elementary child, a secondary child, or an adult, a school member. And then we linked, we didn't create all of these things, we linked to all of these great resources that are out there in the world. We tried to help organize that you could go find like a video on how to do belly breathing, as an example, right? Here's a quick way that you can go, and here's a strategy to use when you need to calm, to use a coping strategy. So we've been able to update that and create that, and that's the one that's taken off for folks, because that is, to me, the big issue is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, for lack of a better saying, but to think that we need to create all these new structures and get all these new things in place. We really need to go back to being able to identify what is usable, evidence-based strategy, and how do we communicate that to folks so that they can use it. And well, I don't know if I would jinx myself or not, but in case there are any funders out there, you know, we had some interest from, I give accolades to John Bell and Emily Wicks at the Ballard Museum, who saw something that we had done and connected, and we just submitted a grant to a foundation yesterday because they would love to be able to extend the idea of puppetry and arts education in emotional health by combining our simple strategies with puppetry as a way to advance virtual learning around emotional strategies. So hopefully we'll get that.
Yes, fingers crossed for that, for sure. I think, you know, Sandy, that's such a wonderful example of the power of a research university, right? That you can, you have scholars who are very accustomed to going to the literature, right? And to finding evidence. And then, you know, it's also part of our outreach efforts as a university to say, let's take this and put it in a package that can be translated, right? And can be accessible and open to people, you know, to people all over, right? From all sort of walks of life. It's one thing that is true about a school is it is a community-based organization, right? So it has the power to touch people throughout an entire community. And I think the, you know, not only the collaborations you talked about within UConn here, but also the, you know, the idea that especially in times of crisis, you know, the ability to put information at people's fingertips in ways that are digestible, that are practical, that just provide research-based guidance, I think is so critical and really speaks to our entire mission as an institution.
Absolutely. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. Yeah, we need the basic research too, but then we need the applied researchers to come in and help
Absolutely.
with the translation and the actual use of it.
Definitely that the scholar practitioner heart, you know, is a strong one for me as well. All right, I will keep doing this. I have no problem chatting with my good friend Sandy. I really would love it if people have questions, though. I'm not seeing any hand raises or questions in the chat. So I will pull my, you know, my counselor hat on and pause for silence for a few minutes if I need to, but I do want to not take up all of our time with my own questions if folks have others. John Elliott, I see that hand.
I'm a novice in this space, but I'm curious as to how you work with young people and differentiate between chronic and acute childhood incidences and experiences that may be affecting them. My assumption is that the needs of those two children are extremely different, but I don't know how easy it is to differentiate those experiences.
Well, that's a really good question. Maybe in your next life, you'd like to join the school psych program and get your degree and get your degree in the Neag School of Education. We'd welcome you anytime. As long as you interview well. Those are good questions. So I think the first part to say is that, first of all, we don't know yet what we're going to see as we all emerge from this, right? And that's why we think about this space, about these simple strategies and supporting emotional health as a bit of a vaccine right now, or the Dennison, Embry, and Biglin called it behavioral vaccines, actually, in their original paper that we used to build this paper. So we need to make sure, that's why we use this triangle or this prevention science model to think about what are the things that everybody needs right now. And we all need a little dose of extra, probably physical health and emotional health, I guess I would say, at least for me, particularly as things are going. So we hope that if we do that, John, we can prevent incidents of the chronic stuff from happening, right? But then I think it's probably important to acknowledge the kids and the families and even staff members and even ourselves who came into this situation already experiencing chronic challenges or difficulties, and what that's been like in a virtual environment. I can say that our students, some of our students have said they've never worked harder, right? Because now we're instead of having these physical meetings, face-to-face meetings with families and providing services, all kinds of services that are needed, some therapeutic services, they're being delivered online, or they're virtual, or you have to figure out how to do all of this complexity in a different space. And so those are the kids that keep me up right now. And actually, it's the family caregivers of those kids is what's keeping me up right now. And so, again, I'll give a plug to InChip for their rapid COVID response grants that they did this summer, because I was able to work with one of my postdocs to do a study on family caregivers of children with developmental disabilities, meaning like moderate to severe, particularly autism or ADHD, to understand what the family caregiver experiences have been and what's shifted in their own self-care and feelings of emotional stress and feelings related to caregiving burden. And that's the part that scares me the most right now, that we need to put some more effort into. Definitely. That and teachers. If I were going to pick another one, that would be my second one. Basically the adults, more so than the kids.
So maybe that it leads to another question. I'd love to hear what thoughts you have about what we can do to support our teachers. You know, I sort of think a lot about the airplane analogy of put your mask on first, right, before you put the mask on a child. And I'm not sure that I think that's hard right now, especially when you're in a profession where your instinct is to always serve others first, right? You know, as many of our teachers and school personnel are. So what thoughts do you have, that might be helpful?
Well, the first thing I do is I try and share a little kindness, right? So I try and even though might be frustrated or mad about something that's happening with my own kids' school, right? Because this is frustrating, and I'm frustrated just like everyone else, right? It's okay to share that, but we share that also with some positive ways of framing and saying thank you for your efforts and whatever that might be, right? I'm very grateful that the community that I live in, we have a foundation that supports the school as well. And so we pivoted in last April to make sure that we did a really big celebration for Teacher Appreciation Week that involved all kinds of fun surprises. And that we got more notes about that as being so meaningful to them because April was a crazy time, right? So now it's at least crazy is normal, right? Somehow, I don't know. But I think, first of all, just sharing notes of kindness instead of, I really get very irked myself when I start reading all of the nasty newspaper headlines or media headlines about schools and what they're not doing. Well, they're doing an awful lot as well. And when it's not perfect, but nobody is perfect right now. That's the other talk, remember, because if we actually adequately funded to be able to do school-based work and do interdisciplinary and integrated work, then we can complain if it didn't work out right.
Definitely. So anyone else want to have a question? If not, I've got one final question. I want to take another pause in case I see a hand or.
It would be mean if we called on students, right? Because I see students on my research team. I see students in our program on here. So,
I almost asked, I almost said, this is the grad student question slot. So I will not ask a question until a grad or undergrad student asks the question in this particular moment. So If you're a student, now's the moment.
They're smiling, at least those on camera, and pretending to look away. So that's okay.
And pretending to look away. Okay. So in an era of kindness, I will not put anyone on the spot. And maybe if you could close with this, you know, the thing that I really sort of circled and underscored as I was making notes was in your sort of final recommendations, you know, the third one talking about how understanding that equity undergirds everything. And so I'd love it if you can help provide some additional perspective on what we can do, and I mean that as, you know, a parent of a child in a school district, a community member. You know, are there ways that you feel like we can do more to be cognizant, aware, assisting in striving for equity as part of this process?
That's a really good question. So I teach an undergrad class in whole school community and child, actually, and what I feel like I have it on autopilot and all the discussion boards because it's online, but my autopilot message is always like, yes, and when you're a future taxpayer and you're a voting member of what's happening in your community, these are things you might want to pay attention to, because inevitably they'll come back and say, oh my gosh, my school didn't do this at all, or we didn't do this, or I can't believe that when I did this interview that they are doing XYZ. So the first thing I guess the relation to that is to advocate and be an active part of the community and the communities around you that you see when you see things, and asking questions about, you know, what's needed, where are the priorities, paying attention to what those boards of ed are doing, because they are trying to figure all of this out as well. I don't have a perfect answer on that, except to just be the best advocate in the space that you can be at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And no, it's a great reminder that, you know, we all have a role to play, whether it's as a parent or a community member, or, you know, helping our school boards think about things. And sometimes that means attending those meetings, right? You know, they're,
yep.
You know, I've been to more school board meetings for my town in this pandemic than I ever have before, because they're actually more accessible to me. You know, yeah. I can dial into them. I can hop on the Zoom meeting in ways yep. that were frankly just more challenging, you know, in my sort of normally scheduled life, you know. So I do think it's a moment to maybe start to build some of those habits.
Yeah, and maybe Carl and some of the deans wouldn't appreciate me saying this, but I'd say it anyway. But let's take the same idea and all the things that we've talked about that and extend it to higher ed, because the same things apply there as well. So if you aren't actively involved in your K-12 space, there's certainly room and space in higher ed for lots of work to be done in creating. Kent's giving me I don't know if he's giving me a thumb or a punch. I'm not sure what that was. A thumb. Is, but that's okay.
It was definitely a thumbs up. Yeah.
I saw it out the corner of my eye. You know, to take part in what we do to make UConn a place that, first of all, advances the communities that are around us, but also is a community that does put this, that makes the whole bigger than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So I will wrap up by saying a thank you again to Carl and Gladys and Amanda, of course, for organizing. Certainly, first and foremost, you know, to Sandy for a wonderful talk today and giving us lots of things to think about. And really grateful for everyone who took time to attend today. I know that, you know, personally, it is helpful and restorative to have a moment to stop the busyness of our work, to think about these important topics and continue to hear wonderful research from fantastic researchers. So we're grateful to all of the partners across campus that help support this research and this effort, as well as the Neag family and the Neag Foundation and the grant agencies that have supported it through their philanthropy as well. So good luck to your next grant, Sandy. I hope it's coming. I hope it does come in. And thank you so much to everyone who attended today. I wish you all well and a fantastic end of the semester. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for spending the time and for moderating. Have a good one and be well.
Be well. Bye-bye, everyone.